I never imagined I'd be the kind of father who had to fight for a place in his own daughter's life. But if I'm being honest, it started long before the divorce papers were signed. Even when we still lived under the same roof, I could feel her mother pulling her closer while slowly pushing me out. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small things, like not telling me when her school play was or whispering about birthday party plans in the kitchen. But over time, those small exclusions turned into habits, and those habits turned into walls. I told myself it was just a phase, that my daughter would eventually see through the bitterness her mother was spoon-feeding her. But years passed, and the gap between us only widened. I stayed hopeful, though. I paid child support on time, showed up at every parent-teacher meeting I was allowed to attend, and never missed a birthday, even if I had to drop the gift off at the porch and leave without so much as a thank you. I figured that someday, when she was older and saw things more clearly, she'd understand that I never stopped trying. When the graduation invitation came, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point I'd been waiting for. I hadn't been sure I'd even be invited. After all, most updates about her life came secondhand from mutual friends or social media posts that I wasn't tagged in. But the envelope arrived with my name written in her handwriting, and that alone was enough to soften years of hardened hope. I remember holding the card like it was made of glass, afraid to touch it too much and smudge the ink. My heart swelled with cautious pride as I imagined sitting in the crowd, clapping like every other proud parent, watching my daughter cross the stage in her cap and gown. I didn't need a special shout-out or a hug, or even a thank you. I just wanted to be there. I wanted her to see that I showed up, like I always tried to. So I put on my best suit, the one I usually save for weddings or interviews, and showed up an hour early, just to be safe. I even brought a small bouquet. Nothing flashy, just sunflowers and lilies, the kind she used to love when she was little. I sat near the back, so I wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable, but still close enough to see her smile. The ceremony was beautiful. Rows of proud families, flashes of cameras, the usual scattered cheers after every name called. When they announced her name, Sierra Lynn Thompson, I stood up without thinking. My hands clapped faster than my heart could keep up. She looked radiant, glowing with the kind of confidence I always knew she had. But when she took the mic to give her speech as class representative, everything changed. At first, it was your typical thank you speech. Teachers, friends, a mention of her mother. Then she paused, looked out at the crowd, and said it. Clear as day, loud enough for every person in that auditorium to hear. To the man who calls himself my dad, I wish you didn't come to my special party. My stepdad is far better than you. The laughter wasn't instant, but it spread like wildfire, soft at first, then louder. Her mom chuckled. Her stepdad laughed and clapped. And I just stood there, holding those stupid sunflowers, wishing the floor would open and swallow me whole. I didn't say a word. I didn't storm out or make a scene. I just turned around and walked out, my legs numb and my throat clenched so tight it hurt to breathe. Outside, the air was thick and hot, but I didn't feel it. I got in my car, drove past 3 red lights I barely noticed, and parked at the lake where I used to take her fishing when she was a little girl. I sat there for hours, replaying her words in my head like a broken record. I kept asking myself what I did to deserve that kind of cruelty. Was I really that bad of a father? Did every sacrifice I made mean so little to her that she could humiliate me like that, just for a few laughs? I knew teenagers could be cruel, but this wasn't just immaturity. It was a public execution of everything I tried to be for her. And the worst part? She looked proud when she said it. There was no hesitation, no flicker of guilt in her eyes. Just cold detachment, like I was a stranger she owed nothing to. That night, I cried harder than I had in years. Not because I was angry, but because I finally realized she had made her choice. And it wasn't me. For the next 2 weeks, I didn't hear a word from her. No apology, no text, not even a passive-aggressive message from her mother, which was rare in itself. I stayed quiet, too. I didn't know what to say, and I sure as hell wasn't going to beg for a place in her life anymore. I focused on work, took some extra shifts to stay distracted, and started journaling again just to keep my thoughts from eating me alive. I told myself I was done trying, done hoping, done pretending that love alone could bridge the gap between us. Maybe I had romanticized the idea of fatherhood too much. Maybe some daughters just didn't want their fathers, no matter how hard those fathers tried. I was beginning to accept that when the phone rang. It was her. Her voice sounded small, nothing like the bold young woman who'd shamed me in front of hundreds. She told me she was in the hospital. Some rare condition had flared up, blood-related. She needed a donor urgently. Her mom and stepdad weren't a match. None of her friends or extended family could help either. But I was. My blood type matched. I didn't hesitate. I told her I'd be there in 20 minutes. What happened next shocked everyone. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It just sits quietly inside your chest, tightening slowly, until breathing feels like a task. That was me, standing in the back of that auditorium, clutching a wrinkled bouquet of sunflowers, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. I pictured her locking eyes with me from the stage, smiling that closed-lip smile she used to give me when she was proud of something. I imagined her giving a generic shout-out to my parents, and maybe a nod in my direction, and even if she didn't say my name, that would have been enough. I was prepared to be invisible. I wasn't prepared to be mocked. There's a difference between being forgotten and being discarded. When she said what she said, when she stood tall, voice calm, and chose to cut me down in front of everyone, I didn't feel like her father anymore. I felt like a joke, a character in someone else's story, written out of the plot with a single sentence. It wasn't just her words that hurt. It was the ease with which they came. The way she emphasized calls himself my dad, like the title was fraudulent. The way she pointed to her stepdad, smiling like he had earned the crown I had spent 18 years holding onto with bloody hands. And then the crowd. God, the crowd. Some laughed politely, unsure if it was a joke. Others laughed freely, like they had been in on it the whole time. But the worst part, the part that still keeps me up some nights, was her mother. She clapped. Not just a polite, obligatory clap, but a smug, slow applause with a grin on her face. She was proud. That was her victory dance. She had waited years for that moment, to have it proven in public that I was replaceable, forgettable, disposable. And her new husband? He soaked it in like a badge of honor. Gave Sierra a thumbs up, mouthed something like, "That's my girl." I could have screamed. I could have stormed down that aisle and shouted every ugly truth about the way her mother poisoned her against me. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen in humiliation, holding flowers for a daughter who had just buried me alive. I left before the ceremony ended. I couldn't bear to see her throw her cap into the air and rush into the arms of the man she now called Dad. I didn't want to hear the after-party laughter or the photos being taken without me. My car felt like the only place I could breathe. I sat in the driver's seat for what must have been half an hour, staring at the bouquet like it might suddenly transform into something useful, an explanation, maybe, or a shield. Eventually, I started driving without a destination in mind. Ended up at that same lake where we used to spend lazy Sunday afternoons, back when she still called me Daddy and thought I could fix everything. I remember teaching her how to bait a hook, how she used to squeal when the fish flopped on the line, how she once cried when we let one go because she thought he'd miss us. Those memories feel like they belong to another lifetime now, like someone else's child lived them. I sat on the hood of my car and cried until my ribs hurt, the sunflowers beside me wilting in the heat, forgotten like I was. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat in the dark with a glass of bourbon, letting the silence scream at me. I kept wondering, what did I miss? Was there a moment I should have fought harder, apologized louder, shown up differently? Was I too passive during the divorce, too cautious not to disrupt her life? Did I make it too easy for her mother to erase me from the narrative? The guilt was a slow poison, dripping into every memory I tried to hold on to. I wanted to believe that Sierra was just confused, that maybe peer pressure or her mother's influence had twisted her perception. But deep down, I knew better. That kind of cruelty doesn't come from confusion. It comes from conviction. She believed what she said. She meant every word. And if she didn't, then the damage was already done anyway. The days after the graduation were hollow. I got up, went to work, came home, and repeated. Friends texted to ask how the ceremony went, and I lied, told them it was nice or emotional. I didn't have the strength to unpack what really happened. I knew the moment I started talking about it, I'd fall apart again. I didn't want pity. I didn't want advice. I just wanted the ache to dull. I deleted photos from my phone, threw away the graduation card, and left the sunflowers in the trash. But no matter how much I tried to erase the evidence, the memory kept looping like a cruel home video. The look on her face when she said those words, that cold smirk, that unapologetic tone, it branded itself into my memory. I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unhear the laughter. 2 weeks passed, and still, silence. I expected maybe a text, a half-hearted apology, something, but nothing came. And slowly, I began to accept that maybe this was the end of whatever thread was left between us. Maybe I had finally reached the part of the story where I stopped being her father and started being just a man who once tried. It wasn't a clean break. It was a slow unraveling of years of effort, love, and hope. I started talking to a coworker more, a guy named Reggie, who'd been through a similar estrangement with his son. We swapped stories over lunch breaks, and for the first time, I didn't feel completely alone in my grief. Reggie told me something I'll never forget. Sometimes, letting go isn't giving up, it's self-respect. I nodded, even though it felt more like surrender. But maybe surrendering to reality was the only way I'd heal. Then came the phone call. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved, but the area code was familiar. Something in my gut told me it was her. When I picked up and heard her voice, shaky, quiet, scared, I didn't feel anger. I felt a dull, distant worry. She explained everything. She was in the hospital. Some rare autoimmune blood condition had flared up, and she needed a donor urgently. Her stepdad wasn't a match. Her mom had tried. No one else in the family matched either. Only I did. I remember the silence that followed her words. She was crying now. Said she understood if I didn't want to help. Said she wouldn't blame me. But even after everything, even after that day, I didn't hesitate. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. And I was. I didn't go there for her gratitude. I didn't go for redemption or to patch things up. I went because I knew I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. That's the thing no one tells you about fatherhood. It doesn't expire, even when the title is ripped from your chest like a name tag you didn't earn. I walked into that hospital with the quiet determination of someone who'd made peace with the fact that love doesn't always get returned. I didn't check in with anyone. I gave my name to the front desk nurse, explained the situation, and signed the forms. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't cinematic. It was blood type O negative, compatible with hers. I lay there, squeezing the rubber ball in my palm as my blood flowed out of my body and into a machine that would process it before giving it to the girl who had gutted me on stage. I didn't ask to see her. I didn't need to. I left a note instead, tucked into an envelope and handed to the nurse with her name scrawled across the front. It wasn't poetic or cruel. It was clear. I'm only doing this for you because that's what humanity is about. But I don't want anything to do with you. You can go to your stepdad after this. That was it. No apology. No bitterness. Just a boundary. One I should have drawn years ago, but kept moving because I still believed love would win out. I walked out of that hospital lighter than I'd felt in years. Not because I was healed or over it, but because I finally understood that I couldn't beg someone to love me the way I loved them. I drove home without turning on the radio. Let the silence fill the space between my thoughts. It was the kind of silence that didn't ache anymore. It just existed. She called the next day. I didn't answer. She called again the day after, left a voicemail. Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Dad, please. I need to talk to you. I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said at graduation. I was just angry, and it was stupid. Please don't shut me out. Please. I listened to the message twice before deleting it. Not because I didn't care. I cared too much. That was the problem. But forgiveness wasn't something I could just hand out like spare change, not when the wound was still bleeding. Her apology, if you could call it that, wasn't for me. It was for her guilt, her panic, her need to smooth over the damage now that she realized the man she pushed away might be the only one who could save her. And maybe that's what hurt most, that it took a hospital bed and a blood transfusion for her to see me as anything more than an inconvenience. That weekend, I found myself at Reggie's house. He lived on the edge of town, a simple one-story with a wide porch and a fridge full of cheap beer. We sat out back, watching his dog chase squirrels it never caught. I told him everything, about the call, the note, the voicemail. He listened without interrupting, just sipped his beer and nodded like he'd lived every word himself. "You did the right thing, man," he finally said, staring out at the yard. "You showed up. You gave her what she needed. But you don't owe her anything more. Not your time, not your heart, not your peace." I nodded, but something inside me still twisted. Not because I disagreed, but because a part of me hated that he was right. I had always imagined fatherhood as this endless well of forgiveness, this role where you keep showing up no matter how many times the door gets slammed in your face. But maybe that was just what I was told growing up. Maybe that idea was less about love and more about guilt. This unspoken rule that if you weren't there perfectly, you'd be punished for it forever. I started to see how much of myself I had handed over in the name of being a good dad, even when I was being treated like a spare part. Reggie leaned back in his chair, arms behind his head. "She's old enough to know better," he said. "She made her choice. You made yours. That's what boundaries look like." A few days later, I got a text from her mother. Just 5 words. "You're unbelievable." She needed you. That was it. No greeting. No context. Just venom, as always. I didn't respond. I let her words sit there like a rotting fruit, ignored and unpicked. That text wasn't about Sierra's health. It was about control. About the fact that, for the first time in years, I had said no to being the emotional punching bag. And I knew, without a doubt, that my ex wasn't upset about Sierra's well-being. She was angry that her narrative was falling apart. She'd built a version of the story where I was the villain, the absentee, the forgettable dad. But when Sierra needed blood, I was the one who showed up. And I did it quietly, without asking for credit. That's what burned them. That's what made them lash out. Because deep down, they knew the truth didn't fit their story anymore. Still, the guilt crept in at night. Not because I felt wrong, but because I had loved her so long, so hard, that it felt unnatural to walk away. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another voicemail, a text, something. Part of me even hoped she'd show up at my door, face tear-streaked, voice shaky, ready to talk. But she didn't. The silence grew thicker by the day, but for once, it didn't choke me. It gave me space to breathe, to reflect, to realize I had done what I could. And sometimes, doing your best doesn't end in a happy reunion. Sometimes it ends in a note on a hospital bed and a voicemail you choose to ignore. The following weekend, I started cleaning out my garage. Not because it needed it, though it did, but because I needed a project, something physical to distract my mind. I found an old box labeled Sierra, school drawings, birthday cards, a crumpled ticket from a daddy-daughter dance. I sat on the floor, surrounded by paper ghosts of the girl who used to think I hung the moon. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt tired. I packed the box back up, sealed it, and put it on a high shelf. I wasn't ready to throw it out, but I wasn't going to keep digging through it either. By Sunday night, I felt a shift. Not peace, exactly, but something close. A kind of quiet resolve. I was done explaining myself. Done chasing a relationship that only ran when I reached. I had done what a father should do, and then some. What came next was no longer my burden to carry. The day she was discharged from the hospital, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. "She wants to see you. Please." There was no name, but I knew it came from her mother. I stared at the text for a good 10 minutes, my thumb hovering over the screen. I could have ignored it. I should have. But some part of me, a part one still didn't know how to kill, felt compelled to respond. I didn't write anything profound. I just typed, "Tell her I hope she recovers well." Then I put my phone on silent and went back to organizing the tools in my garage. The air smelled like motor oil and old dust, and for the first time in weeks, I felt grounded. Still, my hands trembled. There's a weight that comes from being asked to walk back into a fire you've only just escaped from, and I could feel it pressing against my ribs like a loaded gun. Later that evening, I got a knock on my front door. I wasn't expecting company. Hell, I hadn't had a visitor in months besides Reggie dropping off leftovers or beers. When I opened it, there she was. Sierra, pale from her stay in the hospital, thinner than I remembered, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Behind her stood her stepfather, Ryan, the man who had stood and clapped as my daughter denounced me in front of an auditorium full of people. And of course, her mother, arms crossed, eyes sharp, wearing that same smug expression she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. I didn't say anything at first. I just stepped aside, unsure whether to feel stunned, angry, or empty. Sierra stepped in hesitantly, like she was expecting to be yelled at. "Dad?" she started, voice small. I didn't respond. I didn't move. Her mother cleared her throat. "She wants to apologize," she said, as if that settled everything. I looked at Sierra then, really looked at her. There was no trace of the confident girl who stood on that stage and humiliated me. She looked like someone who'd been through a war and was trying to find a familiar face in the wreckage. But I couldn't offer her one. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "You said what you meant," I replied, my voice low but steady. "And now you're here because you need something else. What happens when I don't have what you need next time? Will you go back to pretending I don't exist?" She flinched. Her stepfather shifted uncomfortably. Her mother scoffed. "Oh, come on. She was a kid. She made a mistake. Don't be so dramatic." That was it. That was the push. I turned to her, my voice colder than I'd ever allowed it to be. She was 18, old enough to know better. And you encouraged it. You've been driving a wedge between us since the day we split. And now that your golden boy couldn't help, you come crawling back like I'm the emergency spare tire. The silence in the room grew heavy. Ryan opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "Don't. You already clapped when she replaced me. Stay out of this." Sierra's eyes welled up. "I was angry," she whispered. "I was confused. Mom and Ryan always told me you left us, that you didn't care. And when I saw you at graduation, I don't know. I wanted to lash out. It wasn't fair. I know that now. I needed you, and you came. That means something, doesn't it?" I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to wrap her in my arms and forget everything she said. But love doesn't erase damage. It just makes you feel guilty for not pretending it didn't happen. I nodded slowly, trying to choose my next words carefully. "I didn't come to the hospital for a relationship. I came because you needed help, and I could give it. That's what decent people do. But that doesn't mean we go back to the way things were. That trust, that bond. You ripped it apart in front of a crowd, and you did it with a smile." She took a step toward me, tears running down her face now. "I didn't mean it. I swear. I was just trying to." I raised a hand to stop her. "You wanted to hurt me. And you did. But this isn't about revenge. It's about me finally accepting that I can't keep begging to be in your life. You made your choice. And I'm making mine." Her mother rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. You're being self-righteous." She apologized. "What more do you want?" I turned to her, calm but firm. "I want peace. And I can't have it if I keep allowing people who don't respect me to come and go as they please." Then I looked at Sierra again, my voice softening just slightly. "Maybe one day we can rebuild. But it's going to take more than a hospital bed and a few tears. I need time. I need distance. And I need you to understand that just because I'm your biological father doesn't mean I'm going to let myself be treated like a footnote." The three of them stood there in stunned silence. I think a part of Sierra hoped I'd fold the moment I saw her cry. I think her mother assumed I'd lash out so she could play the victim again. But I didn't give them that. I gave them honesty. Painful, quiet honesty. The kind that can't be spun into a different version of the truth. Finally, Ryan put a hand on Sierra's shoulder and whispered, "Let's go." She looked at me one last time, her lips trembling, and nodded. "I understand," she said softly. "I'm sorry." And for the first time, I almost believed her. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, the weight of the encounter crashing down like a wave. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt hollow, like I had just buried something that meant everything to me. But even in that ache, there was a strange kind of relief. I had stood up for myself. I had said no. And in doing so, I had finally reclaimed something I hadn't felt in years, dignity. That night, I sat on my back porch, bourbon in hand, staring at the stars. Reggie called, and I told him everything. He didn't say much, just breathed into the phone and let the silence settle. "You did good," he finally said. "Real good." I didn't know if it was true, but for the first time, I didn't need validation. I had found something better than approval. I had found my line, and I had drawn it in permanent ink. The voicemail came 3 days later. I hadn't blocked her. Part of me wanted to, but I wasn't trying to punish her. I just didn't want to invite any more chaos into my world. So when I saw her name flash across the screen again, I didn't answer. I let it ring out, then sat there staring at the phone like it had personally betrayed me. After a minute, the voicemail notification appeared, and with a tired sigh, I pressed play. Her voice was softer this time. No tears, no desperation, just a kind of worn-out honesty that felt new. "Hi, Dad," she began. "I know you don't want to hear from me. I get that. I probably wouldn't want to hear from me either. But I can't stop thinking about what I said at graduation, and how proud I was of myself for saying it. I thought it made me brave, like I was standing up for something. But now I see I was just being cruel." She paused. I could hear her inhale, then exhale, like she was holding back something heavy. "You were there. You showed up. And instead of thanking you, I humiliated you. I don't even remember why I thought it was a good idea. I guess I wanted to make Mom and Ryan laugh. Or maybe I just wanted to feel powerful in front of everyone. I don't know. But I do know it was wrong. And that I hurt you. And I'm sorry. Not because I need you to forgive me right now. I just needed to say it. I understand if you don't want anything to do with me anymore. But I'm sorry. I really am." I sat there, the phone still in my hand, long after the message ended. My thumb hovered over the delete button, then moved to the save option, then back again. I didn't know what I wanted. Her words had landed softer than before, sure, but that didn't mean the damage had vanished. An apology is not a magic eraser. It doesn't rewind time or rebuild bridges overnight. Still, something about her tone, calm, broken, vulnerable, stuck with me. It didn't change what she'd done, but it made it clear she'd thought about it. She had sat with the ugliness, stared it down, and come out the other side with a little more clarity. And maybe, just maybe, that was something. I didn't call her back. I didn't send a message. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went fishing. Alone. I packed up my old gear, the same rod I'd once used to teach her how to cast into the lake without snagging the weeds. The dock was quiet that morning. Mist floated above the water, and the world felt still. I cast my line and let the silence wrap around me like a blanket. I didn't think about forgiveness or revenge. I just thought about breathing, about being, about how sometimes you have to let something go, not because you want to, but because holding on is starting to rot you from the inside out. Reggie called me that afternoon. Said he saw my truck by the lake and figured I was finally taking a day for myself. We ended up grabbing a burger and sitting outside on the tailgate. "You hear from her again?" he asked between bites. I nodded. "Voicemail," I said. "Apology." Seemed real this time. He looked at me and raised an eyebrow. "So what now? You gonna let her back in?" I didn't answer right away. I just watched the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the gravel. "I don't know," I said finally. "I'm not angry anymore. But I'm not healed either. I'm just here. In the middle." He nodded like he understood, and maybe he did. "You don't owe anyone your forgiveness," he said. "But if you give it, make sure it's for the right reasons. Not because you feel guilty. Not because people expect it. Do it when you're ready. If you're ever ready." I thought about that a lot over the next few days. The idea that forgiveness wasn't a duty, but a choice. One I didn't have to rush into just because someone suddenly remembered how to be decent. Then came the letter. Handwritten. Dropped in my mailbox without a stamp, so I knew she had driven it over herself. I unfolded it with careful fingers, not sure if I was ready to read what was inside. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Dear Dad," I wanted to say it out loud, but I don't think I would have gotten through it without crying. "I'm writing this because there's no pressure in silence. And I want you to know that I've been thinking about everything. Not just what I said, but what it must have felt like to hear it. I keep replaying that moment at graduation. Your face. The flowers. The way you walked out without a word. And it breaks my heart now because I realize you were just trying to be proud of me. And I threw that pride back in your face. I thought Ryan had earned the title of Dad because he was around. But I never really saw all the ways you were still showing up for me from a distance. I didn't know you were still paying for my books. I didn't know you sat through every school board meeting even after Mom said it wasn't your business. I didn't know that half the people who congratulated me at graduation were your old coworkers who remembered me when I was little. I see it now. All of it. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. If you never want to speak to me again, I'll understand. But I'm hoping, someday, you might let me earn my way back. Love, Sierra. I folded the letter and put it in my drawer. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. I wasn't there yet. But for the first time, I felt a shift, not in her, but in me. The bitterness was starting to loosen its grip, not because I was ready to forget, but because I was tired of carrying it around like armor. Still, I didn't reach out. I didn't text. I needed space to decide what healing looked like on my terms, not hers. That week, I started therapy. Just one session. A trial. I didn't even talk about Sierra until the last 10 minutes. But the therapist said something that stuck with me. You can love someone deeply and still choose not to let them hurt you again. That isn't cruelty, it's protection. That line sat with me, like a quiet truth I hadn't known I needed. And I realized then, I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need an apology. I just needed peace. And peace meant holding my boundaries even when forgiveness was on the table. I didn't mark the day I decided to stop waiting. It wasn't circled on a calendar or celebrated with some big gesture. It was quieter than that. It was a morning like any other. I brewed my coffee, opened the window to let in the fall air, and realized I hadn't checked my phone for a message from Sierra. And more than that, I didn't feel the pull to do it. That was the moment. Not because I had stopped caring, but because I had finally started caring about myself more. After everything, the betrayal, the blood donation, the apologies, and the endless what-ifs, I no longer needed her validation to feel like I was a father. I knew who I was. I knew what I had done. And I knew I had nothing left to prove. I had spent years convincing myself that love meant patience without limits. That to be a good father, I had to be available no matter how badly I was treated. But that belief had cost me more than I realized. My dignity, my peace, and so many nights lying awake wondering if I had failed her somehow. It wasn't until I pulled away, until I made the decision to let go, that I understood just how heavy that emotional debt had become. You can drown in your own good intentions if you let people keep taking without ever giving anything back. And I had been drowning for a long time, smiling through it, hoping she'd reach out and pull me up. But she never did. Not until it was too late. I started doing little things just for me again. I went back to the gym. Nothing intense, just enough to feel like I was treating my body like it mattered. I picked up woodworking again, a hobby I'd abandoned after the divorce when everything felt too loud and complicated. I even started volunteering at a local youth center, helping some of the kids with college applications, job interviews, basic life stuff. Not because I was trying to replace Sierra. That's impossible. But because I still had something to give, and I wanted to give it to people who saw its value. Every time one of those kids smiled or called me Mr. T, I felt a little bit lighter. Like maybe the part of me that wanted to nurture and guide and support didn't have to disappear just because my daughter had turned her back on me. About a month after I got the letter, Sierra posted something on social media that a mutual friend forwarded to me. It was a photo of her holding a cup of coffee, sitting outside with a blanket draped over her lap. The caption read, "Some lessons come too late, but they still come. Working on being better, not just saying sorry." I didn't like it. I didn't message her. But I read it 3 times. And for the first time since everything blew up, I smiled. Not because it changed anything between us, but because it meant she was doing her own work. That's all I'd ever wanted from her. Not perfection, not praise, just accountability. Reggie noticed the shift in me before I did. We were out on his porch again, our usual Friday ritual, watching his dog bark at shadows and drinking cheap beer. "You seem lighter," he said, cracking open another can. "Like something's been lifted off you." I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I think I finally stopped hoping for a version of her that doesn't exist, and started accepting the one that does." He raised his chin toward me. "That's the hardest part, man. Letting go of the version of people you fell in love with, especially when they're your blood." I clinked mine against his and took a long sip. He wasn't wrong. I'll always be her father. Nothing can change that. But titles mean nothing if the role itself becomes a source of pain. Being a father, to me, meant showing up, providing, protecting, even when it cost me more than I had to give. And I did all of that. I showed up when it mattered most. I gave her my blood without hesitation. But the apology, the letter, the tears, none of it erased the fact that I had become a punchline in her story. And while I could forgive her for being young, confused, misled, I couldn't forget what it felt like to be laughed at by my own child. That kind of hurt doesn't just vanish. It settles in your bones and changes how you carry your love. Still, I wasn't bitter anymore. Just wiser, calmer, more careful with where I placed my energy. I stopped replaying the graduation speech in my head. I stopped checking her page, stopped waiting for the next apology, the next outreach. And in that space, I started building something new. A life that didn't center around being rejected or accepted. A life that was mine, quiet, simple, but full of meaning. One Sunday morning, I sat on the edge of the dock at the lake, watching the fog roll off the surface like smoke. I brought a thermos of coffee, my favorite flannel, and no expectations. As I watched the sun rise slowly, I thought about the version of me that had walked out of that graduation. Defeated, humiliated, lost. That man had loved too much without asking if the love was returned. And now, sitting in the same place, I felt the difference. I still loved her, but I loved me, too. And for the first time in a long time, that love wasn't competing. If you've ever had to walk away from someone you love to protect your peace, you're not alone. This story is for every parent, sibling, or friend who's been disrespected but still chose to take the high road. If this hit home for you, share your story in the comments. Let's talk about how we find closure, set boundaries, and start healing, even when the apology comes too late. And if you want more real-life stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything. See you soon in the next story.